paranormal hotspots. You know, there are a few around the world that have been identified by investigators as long-term hubs of high strangeness. We don't exactly know why they become concentrations of weirdness, with UFOs, orbs, ghosts, Bigfoot, crop circles, animal mutilations, places like Skinwalker Ranch. In truth, now there is a new alleged hotspot being investigated by some groups headed by Trey Hudson, who's the current director of the Oxford Paranormal Society, and a subgroup called the Anomalous Studies and Observation Group. They're checking into something that's called the Meadow Project, explorations into the South's Skinwalker Ranch. We're going to find out what's going on there right after this on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. As I mentioned, Trey Hudson is the current director of the Oxford Paranormal Society. He had entered University of West Georgia to study psychology. That he got a scholarship to the U.S. Army, was an ROTC cadet, became a security specialist, studied intelligence, anti-terrorism, counterintel, emergency management, and currently is investigating a really strange place somewhere in the South that he says is a paranormal hotspot. He's here to tell us about it. Trey, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having me, George. Top of the morning to you.
And to you. So tell me what it is. The story you tell about how this place was discovered is pretty entertaining. Why don't you start there?
Well, sure. You know, back in the 2000s, there was a hobby, and it still exists today, called geocaching, which is you basically lay in a series of coordinates into a website, and people go to these coordinates, find remote locations, and look for a log box or a log book or a box into the middle of the woods, sign the log, and it's just a way to get people outside and out in the environment and enjoying the outdoors. I was a member of a geocaching forum in the state in which I live, and we almost got into a point of one-upmanship. We were trying to create more and more elaborate geocaches, and I decided to do something with a little bit of an odd twist. I started researching folklore of a area here in the South, and I found a mention of a haunted road that went through a very remote nature preserve known as the Blackwater Nature Preserve. And supposedly this road was built over the top of an existing cemetery. And the folklore goes that if you drive on this road at night, the offended spirits who were encapsulated by the blacktop of this road would come up out of their graves and haunt you as you drove through the woods and beat on the side of your car and other strange things like that. It's just a really rich, folkloric tale. And I thought, well, that's really cool. What can I do with this? And I decided to put a geocache in the middle of this forest and design it in such a way that it could only be accessed at night. So you had to go to a particular set of coordinates in the middle of the woods at night, shine a high-powered flashlight around in a circle, and you would catch a small glint marker on a tree. Then you would move from your present point to that glint marker, shine your light around again, find another glint marker, and you would basically breadcrumb deep into the forest until you reached a certain pattern on a tree that indicated the terminus of these glint markers. The idea was at that time you would start searching for a hidden box, waterproof box, in the woods that was about 30 feet from the end of this trail, and you would open it up, sign a log book, and if there were some trinkets in there, you could trade out, things like that. The catch was I didn't put any glint markers on the way back. So you had to make sure to waypoint or mark your vehicle in your GPS, or you'd stay out in the woods until daylight. So this obviously was a big success. People just, they loved the story. I took the original folklore and embellished it a bit, added a little bit more spice to the backstory. And people were coming from all over to find this waterproof box in the middle of the woods. And reviews started pouring in. And as I'm reading the reviews, I'm enjoying, what people are saying about it. It was scary, spooky. I took my girlfriend out here, and we had a great time, et cetera, et cetera. One particular review caught my eye, and it was a gentleman that had gone out and found the geocache, had come back to his vehicle and decided he would explore a little bit in this area. And like I said, this is a very remote area, very, very dark, very remote, deep in the America South. And he had parked his car on the side of the road and was doing some exploring on foot. And while he was doing this, a truck pulled up. and stopped and looked his way. And out of the truck came a large firearm pointing at this geocacher general direction. And the geocacher said, whoa, 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 don't shoot, don't shoot. And the voice inside of the truck said, oh, my goodness, I thought you were, some sort of creature. And the geocacher said, oh, I'm sorry, I have two headlamps on my head, one red and one green. It must have looked really weird. And the local said, I thought you were some kind of monster or something out here in the woods. And here in the South we call them haints or boogers or something like that. And the geocacher explained, I'm just out here exploring, nothing nefarious, et cetera, et cetera. And the local said, well, that's all fine and good, but you really don't need to be out here at night. And the geocacher said, well, why is that? And he said, well, this area is not real safe. Some weird things happen here. But whatever you do not go down County Road 1234. And I'll just go ahead and apologize to your listeners now. I've changed the names of a lot of locations in this book in order to keep the site as pristine as possible. So the names I'm using are fictitious names. But, don't go down County Road, 1234. So he posted his review on the forum. And, like any good, curious, inquisitive person, I read that. And the thing that jumps out of my mind is don't go down Road 1234. Well, of course, what road do I immediately want to go down? 1234. Of course. Yeah, why would you not? And several years went on, and I was always looking for someone to accompany me, on this trip, on this expedition down to this, this strange area. It was just too good of a story not to pass up. And I've got a background of spending time in the woods. I was an Eagle Scout. I did the Philmont out New Mexico, and so any kind of outdoors experience, I was up for it. And back in 2015, I finally got a group together to go out there with me, and we found a campsite there in the Blackwater Nature Preserve called the Cold Springs Campsite. And while we were staying there in 2015, we had some odd things happen to us. There's an area called Stevens Lake. And as I was doing some research on the area prior to our trip, there were several MUFON reports about lights and odd things happening in Stevens Lake. And I've got a whole section of background on this area in the first part of the book. We decided that we would drive down to Stevens Lake. And during that time, we were driving down the very, very difficult, rutted, steep, inaccessible road to this lake. I had a strange sense of disorientation, and the best way I can describe it, it's almost like what cinematographers call a dolly zoom effect. That's where the main focus of your shot stays in focus, and you pull the camera dolly back and zoom in on the subject, and the background compresses. It sort of squeezes the background and elongates the visual perception. It's a very weird effect. And that happened to me while we were driving down Smith Lake. And I asked any of my cohort, did anybody experience this strange disorientation? And they said, well, no, we didn't. I said, well, it was very weird. It's past now. It could have just been we were on a very remote road, going down a steep angle at night, and it could have been a disorientation from, the surrounding steepness of the terrain, et cetera, et cetera. So I didn't put much into it. We got down to Smith's Lake, or Stevens Lake rather, and as we were exploring the shoreline, I asked my friends, who's up ahead of me with a red headlamp on? And much to my surprise, all of my friends replied from my rear, no, we're all behind you. What are you talking about? And I had seen what appeared to be a red headlamp or red light bouncing through the forest, probably about 20 or 30 meters from us. And we all turned on the white lights of our flashlights, shined them around, looking for somebody that might have been stalking us or a hiker or something like that, and nothing was to be found. Later on that trip back to our campsite, we returned. The driver saw a black, wispy shape dart across the road. And unfortunately, the rest of us were looking elsewhere when this happened. So we've already had several anomalous things happen during this first, outing to this region, this area. And we had the usual cars locking and unlocking and the failure of electronic equipment. And that pretty much wrapped up our weekend. Enough of these anomalous happenings certainly piqued our interest.
I wanted to ask you about your group, because as you described these different outings, what seemed remarkable to me, in a sense, when you deal with paranormal investigations, is that you didn't seem to have any crazy people. There are no egomaniacs that I could tell, and no real prima donnas who wanted all the attention or made stuff up.
No, absolutely. The folks, and especially in the Anomalous Studies and Observation Group division, are all professional people. We have, varied backgrounds, everything from law enforcement backgrounds, retired law enforcement officers. We had a physicist. We have people with degrees from, you're familiar with the Georgia Institute of Technology.
Sure.
Very prestigious school. Several paramedics, an emergency room nurse. We've got folks with backgrounds in special operations, military, military intelligence. And these are very solid people with, advanced degrees, in engineering and other things, very respectable, solid backgrounds and professions. And, what I tell people when, I'm relaying this story is not only do we have the remarkable nature of the experiences, but the quality and solidness of the experiencers, which makes this story just really, really sound and unique, in my opinion.
So let's talk about paranormal hotspots. What is it? What is the common denominator between, say, the Meadow that you're studying and Hessdalen or Skinwalker or Sedona?
Oh, that's a great question. I wish I knew. I have a few theories, or I can take a stab at it. One thing I noticed when I was researching this, and I come from a military intelligence background. That's what I was originally trained at back during the Cold War, and being somewhat technological Luddites, in the 80s, is when we would do our maps. We would have a large topographical map, and we would have a acetate overlay that we would tape up to the map, and we would draw out troop locations and avenues of advance, and where we wanted to put certain reconnaissance elements and all of this. And so I want people to imagine doing that same kind of technique, except with paranormal events and paranormal happening. You have a map. So let's take our first overlay, and we're going to put down UFO sightings. So every time there's a UFO sighting, you mark it on your map, on your overlay. And you take that overlay off, you put a new piece of acetate over your map, and let's start marking Bigfoot sightings. So you mark Bigfoot sightings. You take that overlay off, put a new overlay on, and we will start marking ghost sightings or high strangeness and folklore. The next thing you do is take all three overlays and you put them on your map, and they coincide. For some reason, there are certain geographical locations where they are hotspots, not just for one type of paranormal, and I use that as a very broad term, not just one type of paranormal happenings, but all types of paranormal happenings. Now, why is it? Why is this? There are tons of theories. Is it a place where there's a very thin veil between our dimension and a next dimension? Are there portals? Are there gateways? Sedona, a lot of people talk about gateways and portals in Sedona. Are they areas of geomagnetic anomalies that for some reason attract these type of activities? Are they areas that run across certain geographical markers like ley lines? That's one of the things that we're trying to figure out. We are trying to bring into the field a lot of technological research, and we're trying to find a common denominator. Every time we have an anomalous event happen in the Meadow or in the area surrounding the Meadow, we have an array of equipment that we're trying to detect any kind of anomaly. Is there a correlation between electromagnetic fields? We have a tri-field meter. is there a correlation between radiation spikes? And I'm here to tell you we're seeing a little bit of a correlation with minor spikes in radiation. And I'm talking microsieverts, not anything extraordinary, but very small spikes in radiation. If we could come up with the field deployable equipment, would we start detecting microgravities? If we had the equipment and the ability to do it, could we start detecting little shifts in microtime? I'm talking about billionths of a second. Does time run differently there? So I think that there's something to it. I think there's a common denominator with all of these strange locations. It's just going to take us a while to figure out exactly what that is.
We had looked at a number of different hotspots around the U.S. and looked for Native American connections, because all the ones that we looked at had still had not only a deep, long history of Native American presence, but current Native American presence. I guess that wouldn't apply to Hessdal in Norway or Romania's forest, but it does seem to have a correlation at hotspots here in North America. So I was curious when I even heard about your book. The first thing I wanted to ask was about the Native American experiences, legends, their lore and mythology and religion, what they would speak of it. And you addressed that early in the book. You mentioned a couple of different tribes that had been in this area.
Yes, sir. There were quite a few tribes there. Unfortunately, we had a terrible event in the history of the southern United States called the Trail of Tears. And many of the Native American and First Nations people were forcibly relocated by the U.S. military to the west. So there's not a large Native presence in the southeast like you would have maybe in the west, like in the United County or somewhere like that up in Utah. But there is a history. There is still, various tribes do have a representation and a presence here. And especially the Cherokee have a long oral tradition and a written tradition of spirits in the forest, Sasquatch-type creatures, evil shamans. One is known as Spearfinger, which is an evil witch that devours souls.
Yeah, that struck a nerve with me there. The name's great, but it sure sounds a heck of a lot like the Skinwalker legend.
Oh, it does. It does. And I think what you're looking at is maybe different names for the same phenomena. And I'll give you an example, coming from a European, perspective. Here in the U.S., we think of grays, and we think about that wonderful illustration on the front of Whitley Strieber's book. But if you go back 500 years to Scotland or Ireland, that might be the wee people, or an elf, or a pixie. So I think that these phenomena happen all over the world, and different cultures label them and react to them in different ways.
Let me ask you about the folklore, because that's one of your rules, is follow the folklore. So the folklore for this particular area, and we're going to drill down on it in a little bit, is that this is a graveyard that was unmarked and somebody drilled a road right over it, and it's been sort of desecrated. Did you confirm that there was, in fact, a graveyard out there?
Oh, yeah, there definitely is a graveyard. And let me, a point of clarification is that was basically a starting off point. That's several miles from the Meadow. That area is not really that close to the Meadow. But the area that started all of this, absolutely there's a graveyard. And in the book, there's a photograph of me, in that particular graveyard. So there's a lot of folklore here. There is history going back of people seeing what they called back in the day wild men, wild, hairy men, which, you move up to the 20th century, that sounds like a report of a Sasquatch. So there's a lot of history in this area.
I'll tell you what, hold on, Trey. We'll come back to the history because you've got some really good examples, even up to current times. Talking about with Trey Hudson about the Meadow Project, this paranormal hotspot somewhere in the South. We're talking with Trey Hudson about the Meadow Project, citizen investigators looking into what they think is a paranormal hotspot. The various adventures that they've had there over the last couple of years are detailed in the book that Trey is here to tell us about. In a moment, we're going to get into what some of those activities that they've documented are, and more about the folklore and history of the area, and we'll be right back with more Coast to Coast AM. Trey, your rule of thumb is follow the folklore, as we discussed in the last segment. Has that worked for you on other hotspots? Have you looked in other places where the folklore turns out to be true?
Yeah, and traditional paranormal investigation, a lot of times you can go and look at, my background primarily started off as a traditional paranormal investigator, not as a ufologist or a cryptid researcher.
So you're like a ghost hunter.
Yeah, or paranormal investigator. What we would always do is when we went into a traditional, ghost case, is would go back, scour, records. We would look at property records. We would look at newspaper reports, and a lot of times in areas that were really, really, really active, you had a history of this. You could crosswalk it back. There was either an oral history or a written history of, items of high strangeness in this particular locale, be it a business, a home, a geographical location, whatever. And if we kind of open up our mind a little bit, you hear about, haunted cemeteries. Well, maybe the fact that these places are quote unquote haunted isn't because they're a cemetery. Maybe it was an area of high strangeness before the cemetery was ever built. Or maybe there was some sort of instinctual draw to this area where the builders thought, well, this would be a good place to put a cemetery. So that's something that's very interesting if you think about it. You talk about Native American First Nation burial sites, being areas of high energy, and a lot of people put the burial sites prior to the high energy. One causes the other. But what if it's the other way around? What if the reason that the burial site is there is because of high energy, and that people, be they Native Americans, First Nation folks, or early American settlers, or whatever, somehow on a very gut level knew that this energy was there and felt drawn to inter their deceased loved ones in this area of high energy.
Yeah, I got you on that. I'd ask you about the native people in the book. You mentioned about the Creeks, and they have something called the Isti Papa. Can you tell us what that is?
Yes. Let me look back.
It's Isti Papa, and there's also a Kolowa, Kolowa, some kind of immortal fairy folk or something like that.
Oh, yeah,
yeah. That's Cherokee.
That's Cherokee. There are quite a few Native American, folkloric, creatures and all. There was one, the non-Yoni-Wee, or stone giant, which was a human-like sorcerer that would consume human beings and control their minds and interact with ghosts. That sounds a lot like a skinwalker, out west. You mentioned the fairy-like beings that would protect the Cherokees. They were apparently like small gnomes or fairies or elves. There's another one called the Raven Mocker that would relieve the dying of their beating heart. And we talked a little bit earlier about Spearfinger, and she was an evil witch which would eat the livers of unlucky travelers or villagers. There's also a history of the Isti Papa, like you mentioned, which is a two-legged creature that would eat men. And the Kolowa is a hairy beast with, described as being like a gorilla, which matches modern-day depictions of Bigfoot or Sasquatch.
So as a paranormal investigator, if you would primarily go out on what we'd call ghost hunting, a lot of folks who are in that are not comfortable being in the UFO camp. A lot of UFO people despise the ghost hunters. The Bigfoot people hate all of them. But invariably, it seems, all these kind of subjects all get mixed up into one pot, especially when you got sort of a general hotspot where all the activity occurs. And I guess you have to learn to sort of get along with everybody and respect the evidence wherever it leads you.
That's an excellent point. Where does the data take you? I think it's rather foolish to look at just one experience and discard the rest. In my training at West Georgia in psychology, it's a very humanistic, experiential psychology program. So I was trained to be a little more open-minded on some things. And, I've experienced that myself. For various reasons, I went to a Bigfoot conference several years ago and wore a T-shirt that said Oxford Paranormal Society. So I was the lone paranormal guy at a Bigfoot conference. It was, kind of a sore thumb, sticking out. And I kept getting a lot of kind of side glances from many of the attendees, like, what's this paranormal guy doing here? But the strange thing is during the break, various attendees would kind of come over to me on the sly and say, hey, I want to talk to you. Because when we were out researching cryptids, this happened to me. And they were things that fell, within the realm of what you would call ghost hunting or paranormal investigation. And I think these things are happening, over and over again in these different fields, ufology, cryptid research, paranormal research. And thankfully, people are starting to maybe open their minds a little bit. Very well-known Bigfoot researcher James Bobo Fay, on a documentary I watched a few months ago, admitted that while he was out doing oftentimes cryptid researching, he would see bright flashes of light in the forest or high up in trees. Well, this corresponds directly with some of the phenomena that we've experienced. This corresponds also directly with folklore of fairy lights, will-o'-the-wisps, jack-o'-lanterns, things like that. So I think people are starting to open up their mind a little bit, and the only way that we can really address this issue and maybe come to some sort of cohesive answer is if we all work together and maybe feel comfortable stepping outside of our little preconceived box.
Let's talk about why the location is secret. You said you wanted to keep it pristine. The problem with that, of course, is, as I'm sure it's occurred to you, is people are going to have a hard time believing you if they can't confirm something about it. So you have in the book, there's this fairly detailed account of UFO cases in this area, and some of them are really spectacular. But of course, if you tell us that you're looking at MUFON's database that told you about some of these activities in this area around this spot that you've given a name, there's no way that anybody can go to MUFON records and say, yeah, there it is. There's that case that they talk about in the book, because you don't reveal the location.
Right. And that took some soul searching. This story, these experiences aren't my experiences. They belong to the world. It'd be rather selfish of me to keep them to myself. So my real reason for writing all this was to let people know what's going on out there. But unfortunately, in like places, like locales that have similar type of phenomena happening, once the location is disclosed, you have a heck of a time keeping it pristine. And I know you were involved with the ranch out there in United County in Utah. Once that location was disclosed, the current owner and previous owners of the ranch have to keep a sizable security force on site just to keep people from coming in and either disrupting the site or, unfortunately, vandalizing or destroying it. And so my team and I, we had to do a lot of soul searching, and we changed names. We changed locations a little bit. All of the data that I took leading, during the preface, not the preface of the book, the folkloric and history part of the book, are taken from public records. And what I put out there is, people can believe this or not. That's up to them. That's totally up to them. I have a stack of affidavits from my team. None of this stuff was observed, for the most part, singularly. These were group experiences. And the only way that we can keep this site pristine is to try to keep it somewhat close hold. Now, the other part of the story is people do know the location. I think you and I communicated back in 2019, and you know the location.
Yeah.
So, it is out there. But one thing that I require is, before I disclose the location, is a non-disclosure agreement. And that's just to protect not only the site, but protect my team when we're out there researching. I had an unfortunate experience. I was invited by a cryptid research group to go up to the Uwharrie National Forest and do some research with them several years ago. There's a very well-known site which has been featured in several Bigfoot shows called Gates Place Campground. It's pretty well known in the Bigfooting community. We arrived Friday night and had the campsite pretty much to ourselves, but much to our surprise, when we awoke Saturday morning, there were about 30 to 40 other tents and campsites there. People just came in during the night and this area exploded. So the sad thing is when we were out trying to do some research Saturday night, whatever we heard or experienced, we didn't know if it was actually a cryptid or an incident of high strangeness or somebody else, in the same area that we're detecting them, or even worse, somebody trying to hoax us. So that left a really bad taste, in my mouth. I thought that's not a good way of going about researching. So, I just have to ask for people's indulgence, and trust my judgment in trying to keep this area secret.
Could you describe, so you call it Blackwater Preserve, I think it is, and it spans like 5 counties in whatever state or states this is in, but that's not the actual name. So is it public property or private property or a combination?
The area that I call the bi-state strip, which is a bi-state area of high strangeness, is both. And when I wrote the portion of the book that talks about the history, it's just kind of being an analyst. I went from macro to micro. I looked at this huge area of high strangeness that encompasses 2 states, and then I narrowed it down to the 5 counties that touch the Blackwater Nature Preserve, all the high strangeness that goes on there, and then narrowed down onto the Blackwater Nature Preserve. The Blackwater Nature Preserve itself is public land.
You had mentioned West Georgia, University of West Georgia. I lived in Carrollton for 2 years. Went to school there on a debate scholarship, so I know that area really well. And I appreciated your mention of it because it's a good school, the psychology program in particular. The I'm sorry.
Oh, I didn't say anything.
Back to Blackwater. So your group starts researching the history of it. You come up with UFO cases going back to 1951, Bigfoot cases going back to 1956, some really fairly spectacular UFO incidents, buzzing cars into the 80s and 90s. People could confirm that if they have a general idea where it is, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And have you run into other people out there? You said the word is sort of out in some circles. Has it been overrun or by different kinds of groups that are investigating the same things you are?
No, not so much. Every once in a while, we'll run into another group or individual that's doing more traditional Sasquatch type research. This area does have, surprisingly, I'm being sarcastic, comes as no surprise, there's quite a few Sasquatch sightings in this area. So every once in a while, we'll run across somebody out doing that. But as far as focusing on this little narrow, 4 to 5 acre epicenter of high strangeness, as far as I know, we're unique in being able to pinpoint and research that location. So we pretty much still have the location to ourselves. But once again, I am not averse to other researchers coming. I just request that they sign a non-disclosure agreement. And the only thing that NDA covers is the location. They are free to discuss their experiences, the events. All of that is wide open. The only thing I like to try to keep inviolate is the location.
You have a couple of cases involving police officers who witness weird stuff. So did they give you affidavits? Did you interview them, or how did you get that information?
The police officer situation was basically taken out of public knowledge, public records.
And do you want to describe the incidents, what they saw?
Yes, let me find that.
It's a lot to remember. You've got a lot of stuff packed in the book.
Yeah. It is. I'm actually just having to flip through my copy of the book right now. That's fine. That's not a problem. Is in the area that I call the bi-state strip, there was just tons of strange stuff. And there was a UFO flap or UAP flap that happened quite a few years ago, in this area. One of them is there's a small town, and this happened, in the 80s. Local police department started getting reports of a wedge-shaped craft. Now imagine that, a wedge-shaped UFO. We've never heard of that before. Kidding. Right. The police chief and one of his officers drove their cruiser to investigate it. They noticed a strange light off in the distance, and they decided to go up to a remote hilltop where they could get a higher vantage, of what was going on in the area below them. They watched the strange craft fly off, and they decided to return to the station. On their way back, they got a call from their dispatcher saying that a neighboring agency, another police department, had reported once again a strange triangle-shaped vessel heading in their directions. They stopped their cruiser, looked up at the sky, and saw a huge triangle traveling directly overhead. They shut the engine of their vehicle off, and they noticed that the vehicle, the aerial vehicle, didn't make any sound at all. And much to their surprise, the vehicle just silently floated off into the distance. And this particular case was witnessed by over 50 people.
That's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
There's also 1996 cattle mutilations in the area. Was that multiple mutilations?
As far as I know, just the one. This, is cattle country, and we do have coyotes and other creatures like that, feral dogs. And I could only find one case that kind of fit the fit the cattle mutilation type situation. It's not something that happens a whole lot in this area, but it's not entirely unheard of. Now, once again, like I said, we've got quite a few coyotes and things like that. So dead animals are not uncommon. But that's the only case that I could actually find was that one.
So the geocacher who got ran into the locals with the shotguns, who warned them, "Hey, it's dangerous out here." Have you been able to sort of pierce the veil and talk to locals about the legends and find out if in fact the community out there in that area does believe that there's some danger involved in being in the general vicinity?
Nothing more than just general, we don't go out there at night, and when you start pinning it down, it's like, why? Well, we don't know. We just don't go out there at night. And that could be a cultural, admonition back from the pioneer days of, you just don't go out in the woods at night. And it might be a cultural carryover for that. There are areas, in this, locale where there have been some horrible things that have happened. And these areas are taboo. There's almost like there's a negative stigma attached to it. In one of the counties, not directly touching the Blackwater Nature Preserve, but near it, there was a particularly horrible murder, and I don't mention this in the book. And the area where this murder happened is down a dark, lonely, forlorn road, and locals just don't like to go there. So it's a general sense of unease in some of these areas, but nothing that the locals can put their fingers directly on.
Well, you do have some stories in the book. Some hikers who find a foot sticking out of the ground. There's a dead guy in a tent, a 51-year-old woman who vanished, and I think her body was found. Yeah, so
it's a weird area. As recently, and I would have to go back and look in my notes. Last year, there was another body found in the Blackwater Nature Preserve. So, is it one of those areas because of its remoteness that people go out there to do nefarious things, or is it an area that draws nefarious people who just happen to do nefarious things?
Trey, Hudson, let's go down the list of some of the expeditions you and your group have made out there, when they started, and what your first experience was in the area that you're describing in the Meadow project.
Yeah, absolutely. We had talked a little bit about our 2015 trip out there, which was just more or less an outing to see if this area had anything going on of interest. We had the strange change of perception that I experienced going down to Stevens Lake. We had the vehicles locking and unlocking, and then we had the willowy, wispy figure move across the roadway as we were traveling along those dark roads. Needless to say, our interest was piqued. This was an area that seemed to be hopping. Something was going on here. And you tie this in with all the folklore that I talked about in the first portion of the book, indicates that this area is going to be something of interest. Well, January 2016, we decided to really start looking into this area in earnest. We camped at an area called the Coal Springs Campground. Not that area had anything in particular interest-wise to us. It was just a nice location to camp at. Decided we would use that as our base of operations. A good friend of mine, Bob, who is pretty well known on some of the Bigfoot shows. He's been featured in some of those. He's a cryptid researcher. His partner, Daryl, and myself decided to take a trip to this area that weekend. And we were going to be met by the rest of our team later on. The real odd things that happened that weekend is that Daryl and I traveled about 30 miles south to the haunted road that the local, earlier in the broadcast we talked about, told us not to go down, except, under extreme circumstances. We decided we were going to check out this road, and we left Bob back at base camp. So we traveled about 30 miles south and were able to stay in communication using a local high-altitude repeater on a mountaintop. And Daryl and I hiked along this haunted road, hit a trail that bisects called the Possum Trot Trail, which is the longest trail in this area, came around and walked back to our vehicle. During our trek around a mountain called Burger's Peak, we heard what sounded like a quail whistle. Now, this was in January at high altitude. Usually you don't hear quail, which is a lowland bird, in a highland-type environment. So we thought that something really amazing had happened. We heard this, anomalous bob-white, quail call in an area that's, known for high strangeness and Sasquatch sightings. And we thought, wow, we have really, this is really the peak of our weekend. And we radioed Bob back once we got back to our Jeep. We're heading north. Said, hey, you're not going to believe what happened to us. And he kind of chuckled and he said, yeah, wait until I tell you what happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, doggone it, nothing is supposed to happen back at base camp. That's why it's base camp. So we got back to our base camp and told Bob our rather pathetic, anemic story of our bird call. and he said, well, let me tell you what happened to me. He said, while y'all were out there, I was staying back here minding base camp, and I was sitting here in the drizzly rain, by myself, and had to take care of some business like, men do when they're out camping after drinking too much coffee. And he decided to step out to the rear of our campsite and take care of that business. And when he's finished, he's, looking up in the sky, which had been cloudy and overcast all evening. A cold, dreary rain in the America South is just something miserable. And he saw the moon appear, a large luminous orb like the moon. And he's like, oh, well, great, the moon has come up. I can see it now. That means the sky is clearing, and perhaps the rest of the weekend will be very nice and clear. So he's watching the moon and having happy thoughts about the weather improving. And then the moon starts moving sideways. Now, I don't know about the rest of the country, but here in the South, the moon just doesn't move sideways.
Right.
And so he's watching this with amazement, and the moon stops, or this luminous orb stops. And in the middle of it, he sees a very small pinprick of blackness. That pinprick starts expanding, almost like the iris of a camera. Black spot or the black circle is getting larger and larger and larger until it just about encompasses the entire orb. And what he's left with is a circle, almost like the ring of diamonds effect during an eclipse. And then it eventually completely blots out. Not long after that, up on top of the ridge, adjacent to our campsite, just to the north, he notices a series of small clusters of lights dancing along the top of the ridge. Now, this is, like I said, in January, so you're not going to have lightning bugs or fireflies out at this time of year. And these lights turn out to be somewhat common, during our investigations over, the several years. These lights in the forest are really, really common, not only during our investigation in this area in general. So we decided to return in July of 2016, and the high strangeness started kicking up a few notches.
Yeah, this is a good trip. You bring FLIR equipment, this kind of equipment that captures some really interesting images on this trip and other trips, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. All of our teams have FLIR, with them, handheld binoculars, which have turned out to be just a phenomenal piece of equipment. And our most amazing, video evidence has been captured on FLIR. And we discovered, adjacent to the Cold Springs campsite, there was a large meadow, about half a mile away from the campsite. Within hiking distance, you have to take your gear in there on your back. But we thought this would be a really neat place to go out there in the environment. It's remote, it's isolated, it's very quiet, and it's very pristine and beautiful. It's a nice location. We thought this would be a really neat place to do some research. You know, we've had this history of Sasquatch. We've seen these strange lights now. This meadow seemed to be a good location to start our research at. And boy, did we hit the mark on that one. During this particular trip, we decided to start off with 3 teams in the meadow, 3 two-man teams. Each team was equipped with a FLIR unit. We were going to have Bob, once again, walk along the top of a ridge line, which is to the south of the meadow. The idea with that is he would be at a higher vantage point than us, and if there was anything between us and the top of the ridge, hopefully he would drive it down to the meadow, and we would be able to pick it up on our FLIR equipment, our thermal equipment. You know, that was the idea. And we all have radios, so we're in constant radio communication with each other. We also have a net control station or a base station back at base camp. That operator is logging everything that we do, so we know where every team location is. All the teams are in direct communications with each other, and we have a base control station logging all activity. So it's controlled pretty tightly. You know, it's not just a bunch of people running around in the woods with no real purpose or mission.
Right. Yeah, it's good planning. Good planning. Yep.
So as 3 teams got to the meadow, they set up in the east, center, and west portions of the meadow. And once we were set up, we radioed back to Bob. He could go ahead and start hiking towards the ridge. And we had a radio transmission from Bob several moments later. And he said, "Hey, guys, I arrived at," and he mentioned a pretty well-known landmark. And he said, "I don't know how I got here." He said, "I don't remember walking here." So the first thing, that goes through everybody's mind, and I mentioned before, we've got a lot of medical people on our team, is perhaps he had some sort of aneurysm or stroke, that he blacked out. But we were concerned. And we said, do you need us to send a team to you to evacuate you out of the area, or what do you want to do? And he goes, "No, I think I'm fine." So then the medical questions came. Have you lost feeling in either side of your body? Do you have bilateral feeling? Do you have any headaches? How's your balance, et cetera, et cetera? And to all of these things, he replied in the affirmative. I'm fine. I just don't remember how I got here. Well, we've all been hiking in the woods and have zoned out, and next thing you know, you arrive at your location and you don't have a solid recollection of getting there. So that's what we chalked that up to. So he decided he wanted to continue on the top of the ridge to see if anything could be detected or driven down to us and detected by our other FLIR teams down in the meadow. He did that. He moved from the east side of the meadow, or east side of the ridge, to the west side of the ridge. Once he reached the west side, he dropped down off the ridge into the meadow, west end, and started heading back. Our teams picked him up on FLIR. The particular team that had him under observation was manned by 2 gentlemen. One was Tim G. Tim G's background is he's a former U.S. Army Ranger and has a degree in physics from the Georgia Institute of Technology.
Wow.
Very solid, grounded individual. The gentleman next to him also has a degree from Georgia Tech, has a master's degree, and has been a practicing paramedic for 20 years. Also a solid, grounded individual. So they have their FLIR units, and they watch Bob drop down into the meadow and starts traversing the edge of the meadow. Through their FLIRs, they see a man-shaped heat signature, as you would expect. And to their astonishment, this man-shaped heat signature turns into an orb, or a circle, or a sphere of heat, and moves at an extremely rapid pace across the meadow. And when we measured it all and calculated it, the movement was at about 25 miles an hour. Now, there is no way that a human being, even the top athlete, can move across this terrain at 25 miles an hour at night. You just can't do it. And so, they were absolutely astonished, and they were watching this on their FLIR units, and then the sphere turns back into the shape of a man. So once again, the team was rather concerned about Bob's well-being, and they radio him, "Bob, are you okay?" And they're watching this figure on their FLIR. They see the figure take a radio, put it up to its mouth, and respond. So definitely the figure that they saw was Bob. "Bob, are you okay?" "Yes, why do you ask?" well, we need to talk about it when you get over to us, but are you okay? Yes, I'm absolutely fine. I don't know what the concern is. So Bob goes over to them, and they're explaining to him what they saw. And they said, well, what was your experience? And Bob said, I don't know. I was just walking along the edge of the field, the meadow. Nothing seemed out of place to me. So, the question of that is, whose perception was altered? Was Bob's perception altered, or was their perception altered? Who had time speed up, Bob or them? So, these are starting some of the anomalous, weird things that are happening in this location.
I'm trying to remember if this is where there's a weird pattern with the GPS tracker that you realize afterward. You analyze where somebody had been, that it's way more movement than should have been normal.
Oh, this is it. This is this is definitely that trip. And so, Bob turning into an orb was a bit disturbing for us. And the rest of the evening happened without any incident. So it was the rest of the evening was rather quiet. And that's kind of a hard act to top there. You're turning into an orb and flying across the meadow. So we made it back to base camp and did a quick after action review and recorded our notes. And the next morning, as we were gathering around to eat breakfast around the campfire and chit chat, visit a little bit, Bob came out of his tent with his GPS unit. Now, Bob's background is he's a retired law enforcement officer from California and worked for years and years and years in backcountry search and rescue. Just an incredible, talented and competent woodsman. And one of the things that Bob always does is he runs a tracking line on his GPS whenever he's out in the woods. So his GPS is constantly tracking him, recording his movements. This is a good idea for several reasons. So he came and showed us his GPS. There were, like I said, several witnesses to this. He said, I want to show you what my track line showed last night. He pulled up the track, and it showed him making several trips of 2 to 4 kilometers in straight lines. Now, you can't move in a straight line over this terrain. It's too rugged on foot. It's almost impossible. Certainly, you can't do it by vehicle because there's no roads in some of these areas. So we started thinking about it, and the only way that Bob could have moved in straight lines, 2 to 4 kilometer stretches, legs, would be as if he was in the air for some reason.
Yeah, yeah, that's
take that for what it's worth. So we decided that we were, once Bob got back, he was going to download those tracks to an SD card, send it to me, and I would go ahead and put it in our electronic notes. I have a hard drive that I store this stuff on. And to our disappointment and surprise, when Bob got back, all of that was erased. It was
man,
GPS.
Well, that stuff happens in places like this.
It does.
Did you ever find any tracks, animal tracks, like Bigfoot prints, anything like that? I know you found some tire tracks that are pretty weird on one of the trips.
No, we never found any Bigfoot prints or cryptid prints. That's one of the things that kind of, drew us to the meadow. Is there were some rather boggy areas on the edge of it, and we thought, if we investigate this meadow or this field, there's some good track traps. Maybe we would see something. But no, we've never seen any. Now there have been people, in the past that have researched this area that have found some, but not particularly our team. No.
I think this is the trip, July 2016. You saw a white humanoid like 3 a.m. That could be me. I mean, I'm a white humanoid, I guess. My hair is getting whiter all the time.
Well, yeah, what happens to the best of us, George? It was one of our team members, the gentleman Glenn, who runs base camp, and he is his background is a career paramedic. Was a flight paramedic for many years. Medevac personnel from Hotspots all over the world. So, once again, another well-grounded, sober, solid individual. Well, he got up at 2 a.m. to take care of some business and had stepped out to the edge of our camp. And as he's finishing up, he notices right around this tree at the edge of the camp, about 30, 40 yards out of camp, he sees a white humanoid-type figure, white in color, appears to be peeking out around a tree watching us. And, he was very shocked, very surprised, and went to wake up one of our other team members that has a high dollar, very, very sophisticated FLIR unit to get her to bring her equipment out to see if we could capture this creature on FLIR. And by the time that she could gather her wits about her and gather her equipment, the figure was gone. Many of our team are trained in man tracking, combat tracking. So we went out and we looked at the area where Glenn had said this creature was, and we looked for any marks on the tree where maybe a hand was, any footprints, any compression of the ground or the vegetation. We could find none. What's interesting is if you go back once again to the folklore, there is a lot of history of a white hominid-type creature in this region that people have reported seeing for a long, long, long time. Almost, some people describe it as like a white-colored Sasquatch or Sasquatch with light-colored fur, and other people describe it just as a white, vaguely humanoid-type figure. So once again, what we're experiencing just locks right in with the existing folklore, which was really kind of cool. We were rather excited about that. So that was our trip in July of 2016. Pretty cool stuff. Not even remotely the weirdest that's happened here. In 2017, in February, we returned. We like to go out there in the wintertime for several reasons. Number one is there's not a lot of people out there. This is, a nature preserve, and you have people camping and, hiking and stuff. Not a lot of people there in February. And we have less vegetation. You can see further with your FLIR equipment when the vegetation is off the trees, bushes, and brambles and stuff like that.
I'll tell you what, hold on, Trey. We're going to have to take a break here. When we come back, I'll let you pick up the story about the February 2017 trip, because there's a crazy lady who enters the picture, and that's an amusing story and entertaining and maybe instructive. We're talking with Trey Hudson about the Meadow project, his investigation, ongoing investigation. He and his group of a location in the South, they have accumulated quite a bit of evidence suggesting it is a paranormal hotspot. We're going to continue hearing some of the events that have been documented by the team, then open up the phone line, see what's in your mind right after this on Coast to Coast AM. Trey, I want to, before we go to the phones, hear about the February 2017 trip by your group. A lot of activity, a portal, some other kinds of humanoid figures that show up on the FLIR, a dark curtain. But the weirdest thing to me is this lady who shows up in the camp out of the blue. So can you share that part of the story? Sure.
In 2017, in February, once we decided to go back during the wintertime to explore the Meadow once again. We were going to use the same protocol that we used before, except we decided, since Bob's situation and some of his experiences, we were never going to have somebody go out solo. We were always going to have at least two people on a team. So we opted to have 3 two-man teams in the Meadow equipped with their thermal FLIR units and have a 3-man team working along the ridge. Once again, the team on the ridge moved from east to west, and that was the team I was on. And when we dropped down to the edge of the Meadow, we noticed 3 figures, human-sized figures, 6 foot, 5'11", 6 foot tall, side by side, turn into one figure, and this was on the FLIR. So these items were putting out heat. So you had 3 heat signatures meld into one heat signature and then dissipate. We have radio communications. We made sure that there were no teams in this area, and there were not. Every team gave their location. So these strange entities were forming. We didn't really know what to make of that. And we dropped down in the Meadow and started moving once again from west to east, linking up with the teams as we moved along. And we had radio contact with our team, which was centrally located in the middle of the Meadow. And they said that they have noticed on their FLIRs these boxes forming. Now, these boxes, they estimated to be about 10 by 6 by 6 meters. So these large cubes forming on their FLIR units. And unfortunately, with FLIR, you don't run the record option all the time because it will drain your batteries. So by the time they get hit record, these cubes started dissipating. But we decided we would investigate anyway. So we met up with this team, and I decided we would send a group of people into the area where this cube or box or portal or whatever you want to call it was. So we were watching on the FLIR unit as the team approached this area. As they approached the area, now once again, let me remind everybody that we have no vegetation. This is wintertime. Vegetation is dead. We're watching the team through our FLIR units approach this area where this portal or this box was, and they disappear. They disappear off the FLIR unit. One thing you can't do with a FLIR unit is hide from it. It's almost impossible, especially in an area that has a cold ambient temperature as compared to the hot heat of a human body. And these team members just disappeared off the FLIR. And it was so startling that the FLIR operator, you can actually hear him on video say, "Did they just disappear?" And when we questioned the team members, they said it was almost like walking into an area that was surrounded by a black curtain. It was extremely dark and dense, the environment was. When they approached this area, they did not have to fight through any dead brambles or dead briars or anything like that. It was a smooth transition into this area. When they came out, lo and behold, they did have obstacles in their way. The obstacles were not there present going in. The obstacles were present coming out, which was rather remarkable. The neat thing is we have all of this on video. So to my knowledge, this is the first and only video I know of people actually approaching, what you can call a portal, you can label it whatever you wish, disappearing from view and then coming back out. Not long after that, one of the FLIR operators swings her FLIR unit over to the right, which is facing west of the Meadow, and she says, "Who or what is that?" And there is what appears to be two more heat signatures watching us from a small copse of trees about 30 yards away. And I have a photograph of these figures, these heat signatures in the book. So we were absolutely just amazed at this turn of events. Historical. Nobody has ever experienced anything like this, and we gathered together rather excitedly there in the Meadow, and we're discussing what we should do next. I made the decision that we needed to go ahead and terminate investigations for the evening, go back, do an after-action review, and try to take all of our data and record it and make sure that we all understood exactly what we saw, start taking statements and things like that. By the time we got ready to move out, my base camp operator said, "Trey, there's somebody here that wants to see you." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know you want to see me. I'm on my way back." And he goes, No, there's somebody else that wants to see you. So this is 10:30 at night, 22:30 hours at night, in the wintertime, in a remote forest in the middle of the night. And there's somebody there that wants to see me. Okay, I'm game. So we make way back to the base camp. And when we get there, there's a businesswoman there. She's wearing loafers, slacks, a blouse, and a blazer in the middle of the forest, in the middle of nowhere. And this woman is absolutely incessant that we drop what we're doing. We cancel our after-action review, and we follow her down to this very remote road in the nature preserve. And she said there's a structure at the end of this road, and this structure is inhabited by a family of what she calls, and I quote, monkey bears. And she was, absolutely just, determined to make us go down this road. Well, I'll be damned if I'm going to follow some strange businesswoman down a dark forest road, in the middle of the night. That just doesn't sound like the most safest thing to do. And during the course of this conversation with this woman, she starts asking a little bit about our backgrounds. And she asked me, where did you go to university? And I said, the University of West Georgia. And she said, oh, I did too. She goes, well, what did you study? I said, well, my degree's in psychology. And she goes, well, mine too. And I'm thinking, okay, now this is she's putting me on. I said, well, ma'am, tell me some of the professors, that you studied under. And she actually started naming some of my professors that I knew.
That's a pretty big coincidence there, middle of the night out. Yeah, this lady just shows up in your camp. She went to your school, had the same professors.
Yeah, I think she had the same degree. It was just, I was feeling a little uneasy about her wanting us to go out to that remote location because I didn't know if we were going to be robbed or probed or what.
Is she boozy? Is she doing meth? Is she on drugs or messed up? Or
she was messed up. Glenn, our base camp operator, career paramedic, stated in his statement, said, I have never in my life seen somebody act as messed up as this woman was. So she is just acting crazy. And to top it off, she stops, the conversation with us, steps out about 20 yards, 30 yards from, where our base was. We're at our radio and our tables and everything. And she was right at the edge of our lantern light. You could still see her. And she squats down and urinates in front of everybody. I don't even know what to do with that.
Did she arrive in a car?
Yeah, she was in a car. And she had a young male, and she said was her son, and I put son in quotation marks because I don't know the biological relationship between this, 15-year-old estimated male and her. So this kid sat there very stoically, not engaging with any of us. So there's these just two strange people appearing for no reason.
You kind of compare it to a Men in Black type episode.
I did, and I started, doing some research. I went and looked at some of Nick Redfern's stuff and some of John Keel's stuff. And the things that started hopping out at me was not properly dressed for the occasion, strangely dressed, not understanding cultural protocols, i.e., you don't just squat and urinate in front of people you don't know. The missing of cueing, the body cueing and the vocal cueing of, hey, go away, we have business to do, leave us alone. She never picked up on that. And she finally just got frustrated and left. I did do some research on the name that she gave us, and it does correspond with a woman who is a professional in this region. Now, here's the deal. Is the woman whose name, who also matched the description of the woman that was at our campsite, is a licensed professional. I'm not going to tell you what her profession is out of privacy, but she is a licensed professional. Her activities and behavior that night would probably cause her to have her license revoked and end her career. So either I encountered a professional licensed woman on absolutely the worst night of her life in the middle of the forest in the wintertime, or it was something masquerading as this woman, like a doppelganger.
Well, not to mention what she's done to the reputation of monkey bears. I mean,
yeah.
All right. We're about out of time here, Trey. There's several other trips that you and your group took where you describe weird things. The story about the tire tracks in the meadow. There's some ghost box conversations that are transcribed. I never know what to make of those things. I don't know how legit that is, but it is always interesting. And then also chupas that were detected out there. So we'll have a lot more to talk about the next time you come. The book is called The Meadow Project. Trey Hudson, thanks for being here. Keep me in the loop.